This was a lot darker than I was expecting. For not being a thriller, this book had one of the best twists that I have ever encountered, ever. What is happening here? Hey friends, I'm Elise, and today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in the month of July. So July was not a super great month. For pretty much the entirety of the month, I was very deep in a reading slump. Here's to hoping that August is better. In July, I read 7 books, so let's go through those real quick. First, I read Riley Sager's new thriller, The Only One Left, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. Next, I read The Spare Room by Andrea Bartz, which is a thriller that I had an e-arc for from NetGalley, and I rated that one 3.5 stars. Next, I read The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. I do have a copy of this one. I, for the life of me, cannot find it anywhere, which is why I'm not holding it up. This is a historical fiction, and I rated it 3 stars. Next, I read The Power by Naomi Alderman. This is a dystopian novel, and I rated it 4 stars. 19 Claws and a Blackbird. This is a horror short story collection by Augustina Bastarrica, and I rated it 1.5 stars. Every Heart a Doorway. This is book 1 in the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire, and I rated this one 2.5 stars. And to end the month, I finally found myself another 5-star read, Cover Story by Susan Rigetti. This is a contemporary fiction novel, and as I said, I rated it 5 stars. You have no idea how excited I was to finally find a 5-star. My last 5-star read was in May. So I went all of June and almost all of July before I found another 5-star read. It was rough. Now let's get into the battle of the books. If you're new here, all book titles that I read for the month go in here, and I conduct a brief objective analysis of the 2 books to determine which book would be a better recommendation for majority of people. First one is The Spare Room by Andrea Bartz and The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. So The Spare Room by Andrea Bartz, this is actually the sister, I believe, of Julia Bartz, who is the author of The Writing Retreat, which I read earlier this year and I really enjoyed. It follows a woman. She ends up staying with a friend. They knew each other in high school and they haven't really kept in touch except for Instagram, like fairly recently. So the main character kind of has a little bit of like a girl boss crush on this woman. Well, the main character is having issues in her relationship with her fiance, so this other woman invites her to come stay at her house with her husband. Our main character goes to stay at this home, and it's like this huge house in this very wealthy gated community. During her stay, she ends up entering into a throuple with this married couple. Lots of things happen, and it kind of comes out that they were in a throuple with somebody else before her, and now she's gone missing. Overall, this book was okay. I enjoyed probably like the first half of the book. I was really into. I enjoyed the atmosphere. It was really creepy. The house is like set right next to a cemetery, so there were definitely like some creepy vibes, which I loved. And honestly, I was kind of digging the whole story of the throuple. It was kind of sexy and mysterious. As the book went on, I started to lose interest. Ultimately, it ended up not being one of my favorites. And then of course, The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. This is a historical fiction novel during the time of the Dust Bowl in American history. If I remember correctly, it's like in the 1920s. So our main character, she lives with her family in Texas, and they're farmers, and there's just dust storm after dust storm blowing through. This was before farmers really understood, I forget what it's called, but it's where you have to let the land rest. You cannot plant something every single year because it completely dries everything out, depletes the nutrition. This was before farmers really knew about that. Their land wasn't doing well to begin with. The dust storms blow through and literally everything is blown away, so the livelihood of farmers is non-existent at this point. The government kind of steps in and they start trying to assist these farmers, like, hey, we'll give you money, but you have to let part of your land rest for a bit before you can start planting new crops. But then other people, such as our main character, they head west to California and try to find work there. For me personally, I did not care for this story. I don't think this time in history was one that I'm super excited to read about. It was very depressing. It was very stressful. So I personally did not like it. However, I do agree that Kristen Hanna is a very good writer, and her newer historical fiction works are really well done, beautifully written. So while I have similar opinions for both books, like I think my enjoyment level is pretty even between the two, I think more people would like The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, so that's the one that wins this round. Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire, and Cover Story by Susan Rigetti. So as I said, Every Heart a Doorway is book 1 in the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire. This is a novella series, and I'm pretty sure I've never heard a bad word about this series. Going into it, I don't think I really knew what it was about because it was very different than I expected. very different. So you meet all these different children. I say children, they're teenagers, and they are staying at this manor, and even the lady of the house is one of these people. Somehow throughout their lives, they come in contact with a door. It's a portal to another dimension or another world. From the sounds of it, most of these children, when they go to this other world, they find it feels like home. When they come back, they need support to either kind of readjust, reacclimate to the real world, or even sometimes process what happened to them. So they stay at this manor, this kind of boarding school of sorts, and everybody has their own room, and depending on what kind of world that they were in when they were gone, that's going to determine what kind of room they could stay in, what kind of person could be their roommate. Things start happening. This was a lot darker than I was expecting. I was imagining something magical, whimsical, maybe even a bit lighthearted. That is not the case at all with this series. Overall, I was disappointed, and I don't think that this series is going to be for me. Cover story by Susan Rigetti, on the other hand, I loved this book so much. So this is a contemporary novel, and it follows an NYU student who gets wrapped up in the shenanigans of a con artist. So we meet Laura. She moves to New York City, and she gets an internship at Elle magazine, and there she meets a woman called Cat Wolf. She has like this exotic accent, and she carries herself in a very confident way, and Laura's mesmerized by her. She ends up getting to know her a little bit, and Kat kind of brings her in on a project to help her out with. It goes from there. And I don't want to say much more than that, but what I will say is that if you liked The Devil Wears Prada, starring Anne Hathaway and Meryl Streep, and also Catch Me If You Can, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks, then I think you could potentially like this book. It was very fast-paced. I gobbled this up. Coming off of one of the biggest reading slumps of my life, this was amazing to me. It's an epistolary novel, so it's told completely in the form of FBI reports, instant messages, emails, diary entries, and even Instagram posts. That combined with how like fast-paced it is, it went really, really quickly. And the end, for not being a thriller, this book had one of the best twists that I have ever encountered, ever. I think this would appeal to a wider audience than Every Heart a Doorway. I'm going to say Cover Story would win. The Only One Left by Riley Sager, and 19 Claws and a Blackbird. Well, that one's not going to be hard. So 19 Claws and a Blackbird is a short horror story is a short horror story collection by Agustina Bastarrica. She's the author that did Tender as the Flesh, which that may qualify as a novella. It was a pretty short book, but that's a dystopian horror where animals are somehow poisonous to humans. So we don't farm animals anymore for meat. We farm people for meat. I don't know why we wouldn't just go vegan, but that's what happened in that story. Anyways, I loved that one. It was horrific, but it was really well written. This is a translated work. The author is from, I believe, Argentina. It was originally published in Spanish. So there's 20 stories total. And there was only one story that I understood, or at least accepted the fact that I didn't need to understand everything and found enjoyment out of. So one story out of 20 that I finished and felt positive feelings about. That's not good. Most of these stories were way out there, or they didn't make sense, or there was nothing for me to grasp onto to really formulate a good opinion about them. Unfortunately, this was a huge miss for me. The 1.5 stars that I gave it are mostly because I do see that the stories are well written and they are very creative. And The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This one follows Kit, and she is like a home health aide, and she ends up going to work for Lenora Hope. Something happened to Lenora and she can't take care of herself. She's an invalid at this point. She can't speak, she can't move, and she needs somebody to take care of her full time. Kit goes to stay at this huge home on a cliff and takes care of her. And there's dual timeline. We get the present timeline of Kit taking care of Lenora, but then we also get a past timeline of Lenora when she's younger, living at this home with her family, and Lenora was accused of murdering her entire family. Inspiration for this was taken from the story of Lizzie Borden. This was not my favorite Riley Sager. Home Before Dark is still number 1. House Across the Lake is number 2. This is probably number 3, which I'm disappointed about. This one was a little crazy with the twists, just a little. And I don't mean crazy like House Across the Lake crazy. I mean crazy like it got a little gimmicky after a certain point because they kept happening. Twists and reveals kept coming out of the woodwork, and I finally got to a point where I was like, what is happening here? I couldn't trust anything that was said in the book. But overall, The book is well written. The story is pretty clever. And I know a lot of people love this one. I think for like the typical thriller Riley Sager fans, this is like a new fan favorite. And I do see why. I do see why. Just for me personally, not my favorite. I did really like the ending of this. Honestly, the epilogue brought my rating up a little bit. Between these two books, 19 Claws and a Blackbird and The Only One Left, The Only One Left would win this round. Okay, there's only one left, so I'm gonna put the 3 winners in here. So we have The Only One Left by Riley Sager, The 4 Winds by Kristen Hanna. Both books are really well written by very experienced authors. Both do have historical aspects. So these are actually pretty similar in a way. But one, The 4 Winds, very emotional, very kind of serious, to be honest. And I know not everybody loves historical fiction. I feel like with a lot of historical fiction, they're so niche. Like this, it's so focused on the Dust Bowl era and the Great Depression, and it's just very, very heavy in that. Whereas The Only One Left, yes, it's historical, but it's not so focused on the time period as it is what's going on in the book. From an objective standpoint, thinking of which book would be enjoyed by most people, I'm going to go with The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Cover story by Susan Rigetti, and The Power by Naomi Alderman. The Power by Naomi Alderman, this is a dystopian novel. In the present day, women have this electric power similar to that of an electric eel. They have something inside of them that allows them to essentially conduct electricity, and with a simple touch they could severely injure, they could cause pain, they could even unalive somebody. Because of this power, women hold over men. They are the superior gender. The script is flipped. The women are more authoritative and they are more violent. They are the ones that hold powerful roles in government. The men are the ones that are seen as more docile and more nurturing. I don't even know that I fully understand this book. It was kind of a difficult read, a little bit hard to follow. However, I cannot deny the message that this book puts out there. It exposes our reality for what it is, which is ridiculous. This has been adapted to a show on, I believe, Prime. I haven't seen it yet. I really want to. Honestly, I'm begging you, if you have not read this or have no interest in reading it, watch the show. I'm recommending it without having watched it, which may be a mistake, but if the show is anything like the book, I think it's important. Hard read, but a powerful one nonetheless. But between these two books, objectively, I do think that more people would probably appreciate this one just because it's an easier read. It's faster paced. The story is just a little bit more digestible. Cover story would win this round, which means for the last round, we have Cover Story by Susan Rigetti versus The Only One Left by Riley Sager. So here's where I struggle, because I loved this book so much. I enjoyed my time reading it, and I think it was very clever. It was very cleverly done. There's a lot that has to go into it. It's the type of book where you get to the end and the big reveal happens and you're like, wait a second, what? And you have to like go back, not because you don't understand, but like you want to go back and be like, okay, you want to like play detective, like where was this alluded to? I need to like conduct a full investigation on this because my mind is blown right now. It was fun. The Only One Left by Riley Sager, I think, is also fun in that regard. So gosh, okay. As much as I loved this one, I do think that, objectively speaking, in general, more people would enjoy The Only One Left by Riley Sager. I'm pretty sure that's Susan Rigetti's first book. Riley Sager, he's a well-known, well-loved author. What he does very well. I do think overall this was maybe like a greater, like a bigger work. So there were like more puzzle pieces that had to come together to make sense. So both books had puzzle pieces that had to come together in the end. But the Riley Sager one had more. So it's maybe a little bit more impressive. Though it was not my favorite book of the month, objectively, the best book that I read this month was The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let me know what your favorite read in July was, and if you read any of the same books as me, let me know your thoughts down below. And until next time, bye!